All right. Welcome, folks. Welcome back to Larger, Freer, More Loving. As always, I'm Matt Levine.
I'm Dwight Lewis.
And after two really badass episodes with guests, we're sticking with what works. And we're also going to continue a line of thought that we've been working on in these different episodes. So last time we mentioned that we've been talking about current racial dynamics and crises of structural environmental racism like COVID-19 within too narrow of a black-white binary. So we wanted to extend that last time by having a discussion with Latinx philosophers of Latinx thought and identity, Stephanie Rivera Berruz and Taina Figueroa. And today we've got intersectional indigenous activists, Desiree Kane and Tewentenhawihtha Aldrich. And we wanted to just start off by thanking y'all so much for being here and giving you a chance to introduce yourselves. And I really like alphabetical order. So Desiree, we'll start with you, please.
Hey everybody, my name is Desiree Kane. I'm a Miwok organizer who lives in occupied Arapaho territory here in Colorado.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Desiree. Wheata.
My name is Tewentenhawihtha Aldrich. I am 26 years old. I'm from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska and also Mohawk from Upazesne. And I am a mother, so it's kind of my main identity awesome. There. Yeah. And a part of SUNY Potsdam as coordinator of Native American Affairs. And yeah.
That's cool. Awesome. Thank you for that, seriously. So Matt mentioned COVID-19 at the onset, because one of the many disturbing aspects of the pandemic, which doesn't get discussed anywhere nearly enough, is the fact that Black communities, indigenous communities, are seriously being hit by the virus at 5 times out of white communities. I think that a lot of people, especially Americans, who should know, are naive about the problems facing Native peoples. Can you, and we're gonna start with Desiree again, can you, Desiree, please speak to this naivety by giving us a few of the major issues that Natives are dealing with in today's United States?
I think that there's a lot of invisibility that people are experiencing, and that's contributing to why and how specifically the Indigenous community is so directly affected and hard hit. There's also systemic racism that seeks to, exterminate Native people. So folks are experiencing things like the Indian Health Service is drastically underfunded. Tribes are being sent body bags instead of COVID aid kits. There's a lot that's going on right now. It's kind of a complicated question because, we're speaking to entire diasporas of people, but when we're looking to, why is Indian country hit so hard? I think a lot of it goes to, there are Americans out there in Trump's base that they still think that Native people are extinct, right? So having to work with the failure of an education system and the invisibility in a system that's meant to make people invisible, it plays out in every single level of governance, government, societal institutions otherwise.
Yeah. I hear that. It hurts. Like I'm already hurting already. I understand the invisibility to some extent being Black, but I can't even imagine because there's so many Black people that are in the world's face, and I really do think that when it comes to Native folk, that we just don't see. Like we literally don't have, there's no visibility there. So you said that, it hit me because I was like, yeah, it's a lot. The invisibility is so much more clear, if I can use that word, for Native folk than it even is for Black folk.
I'm gonna.
Go ahead, continue.
Oh, that's not also to say, there is a moment that is being experienced right now in American society where statues are coming down and people are starting to understand colonization. And I think very much so, we can thank the movement for Black Lives, right? Folks are, white Americans are having a veil lifted from over their eyes
100%.
to something that Native and Black people have experienced for literally hundreds of years.
Yep.
So I just look at what's going on right now and know that, you know, our communities overlap, but also like the Black community is not our enemy. And
Not
in
at
these
all.
moments, we are together, like moving forward against a system that hurts and towards a future together that looks more, you know, just and simultaneously honors tribal sovereignty. So.
No, that was well said. I appreciate that. I really do. Wita, I'm going to ask you the same question. Can you speak to the naivety of Americans in relationship to the major problems that are facing? And if we are going broad here, I will ask you to actually be a little bit more narrow and say that are affecting your own community.
Okay, so whenever I was reading the questions in the email about how, I'll answer that one because I'm kind of struggling with the how do you say that word again?
Naivety.
Naivety. So because I kind of have my own views on invisibility.
Oh,
but,
talk about that then. Jump in. We would love to hear more about that.
Well, Matt knows I take a long time for the gears to start turning, so it's like I'm just gonna take a minute. But so I didn't want to go into this question blind, right? Like I kind of wanted to give like a clear answer on, you know, why Native communities would be hit five times harder. So I reached out to my brother. He's the community health representative and emergency medical technician in our Winnebago community. And I said, how would you answer this question? So what he had said was that, well, number one, the underlying health issues that we already have within the community and the chronic illness. So he said, I was explaining this before to someone, and he said that there's already an epidemic of chronic disease and illness within our communities. So when you crosshatch that with a global pandemic, there's not a lot that you can do because you haven't treated the first pandemic. So that was his answer. It's definitely not my answer, but I go to him for any health related topics, really. And the second issue that he had stated was the poor health infrastructure of Indian health services, right? And specifically with our community, I'm pretty sure we got out of that Indian health service format and the tribe took it over by itself. But you're taking a infrastructure that's already not built for us, and Indian health services has, I mean, you have to think there's enough racial bias going on in there already. So the doctors that we get within Indian health services, they don't know enough about us to care, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we had to take it out of that IHS format and bring it back to our own community. But that cannot happen in just a click, right? There has to be some major developments, and like, okay, so if we're taking it out of IHS format, what are the new developments that we're going to do now? And how are we going to make this our own infrastructure? And you can build the infrastructure again, but you really can't replicate another colonial infrastructure. So then you got to go back. You really just got to go back into the community and look. And there's horrific things that happen in Indian health services throughout the United States. It's really awful. But yeah, I kind of got lost in that question there. What was it?
No,
Yeah,
so that's
that was great.
perfect, Wheata. So I mean, one of the things that's really interesting there is we talk about this issue of invisibility around the extent to which COVID-19 is hitting indigenous communities right now. But even if that becomes visible, there's these
Yeah,
other
yeah,
invisibilities
yeah,
behind that make it so people don't understand that
yeah,
sufficiently, right? So I mean, if we're talking about underlying health illnesses in indigenous communities, right, we've got to talk about
yeah,
the
yeah,
extent to which, in the area that Wheata and I are right now, General Motors, Alcoa, and Reynolds have a really, really long history of dumping polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, at Akwesasne, the Mohawk reservation here, right? And this not only in and of itself leads to significant health problems, this is a traditionally fishing community that now if you've got PCBs in the waters everywhere here, this causes serious problems for traditional diets, leads to other problems like diabetes, which again is one of the significant comorbidities for COVID-19. So
oh,
I guess I'm stuck on this notion of invisibility here.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts here. There's what's the relationship between invisibility and sovereignty here? Because it seems like it seems to me like one of the ways of dealing with this invisibility is recognizing the sovereignty of indigenous tribes more appropriately. But there's also that invisibility that leads to Americans just
Yeah,
doing what Americans do and taking
yeah, yeah.
over. So I guess I don't know. Was there a question there anywhere?
I, I also am intrigued by the layers of invisibility. I think that's one thing that you really allowed me to attune myself to. Is these layers of invisibility, it's something that I think a lot more Americans need to be attuned to. Is that this isn't just we're not talking about just poverty. We're not talking about just the pandemic. We're talking about poverty that has been like placed on a certain community, and that America has allowed other people to keep them in that place by allowing land to be used um, uh, unhealthily. And so it's like America is also behind the layering of the problem. And I'm just like, this is, it's sad. It's really sad, the amount of layers of invisibility that we have. My question is along with yours, but it's like, speaking to these layers of invisibility, what do you have to say? Anyone can jump in too.
I want to say a big perpetrator is the education system that we all go through. You literally do not learn anything. I know so here's another fun layer. In my elementary education, so I must have been in second grade or even in first grade, I attended the St. Augustine's Indian Mission School, right? So that was traditionally a boarding school. And so all throughout Indian country, you have this model here that there's boarding schools in different Native communities. I don't know about all Native communities, but there are many, right? Desiree, they're almost, it's crazy because there's the larger boarding schools that are within the United States that children were sent out to, but there's also this really invasive boarding schools that were placed right on reservations and have this enormous influence in our lives. It's so crazy and critical, but let me jump back to that. So and I think it was either first grade or second grade, must have been social studies, I don't know, it was a textbook, and we're talking about Midwestern Plains Indians. And what I had seen was on the page a graphic of a buffalo, and then the Indian, so to speak, on the buffalo riding it in this like majestic wind. I don't know. So that's what I remember as first and second grade, and I remember looking at that like, did we ride buffalo? So so you know, you can call education a perpetrator of our miseducation about what's going on with Indian country and our existence, really.
So even the education system is not only making you all right, like outside of the reservation there's an invisibility, but also inside the reservation, like it seems that the education is also layering invisibility towards yourselves.
Yeah, it's so pervasive, and it's meant to gosh, I don't know, not cover our identity, but destroy our identities completely. And yeah. So.
And very explicitly so, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
part of the boarding school ethos was this horrific idea of kill the Indian, save the man, right? So this is a very explicit, open, again, open white supremacy from Americans here.
Wow.
Yeah, really. And then another perpetrator is media, and I know Desiree can speak to those notions. But I mean, any what are those called? The old cowboy movies? I forgot what those are called.
Westerns, yeah.
Spaghetti westerns.
So I mean, I don't know. It just seems like it's formulaic, right? I mean, you have a generation who's exposed to those Hollywood films, and you get this idea of what an Indian is, and it's, I mean, it's awful. And then there's stereotypes of like stoicism. I don't know. I struggle with so many words, but there's a
Me too.
stereotype of stoicism and those types of things, but it's like really stripping away the fact that we're multi-dimensional human beings with identities here. We have so many components to us, and you're only exposed to one image. So if you're only exposed to one image, your personality, or you must not have personality. You guys must not be real. So that gives me the right to manipulate you, and the long list of genocidal acts that are being done, were and are being done.
So Desiree, now I am going to ask you about the invisibility of media. Just speaking off of what Wheatta had to say, I know that being, I'm going to relate it back to being Black because that is my experience. But there's a certain way to be in the world based on media Black. And I know that I'm always buttoned up against it. And so I know that you do a lot with media, and you also don't just do it in a way that is the traditional way. You just had a documentary come out of Sundance, right? And so we just love to hear what you had to say about media in relationship to Native folks.
Well,
it's a broad question.
It's a broad question. So the media is part of a broader system that is incredibly like patriarchal. And so that plays out in media a lot, where people are presented with just like a regular number of tropes about Native people, right? So you've got the noble savage, you've got the earth mother, you've got like, there's a handful of these tropes. And like, you never see like Eric, the high school teacher who's also Native, or, you know what I'm saying? You're never presented with people who look and act like a community. It's very like dehumanizing, because if you don't fall into one of those tropes and you've grown up, like that's the only messaging or representation of yourself that you see, you wind up with cognitive dissonance about who you are, what are you supposed to be, what's performing identity, like what's actually, like it creates a lot within a Native person to like only ever be greeted with these same tropes of how we're supposed to be. And then when you don't fit into that, it makes it really hard for our youth. And that also makes it, that ties into why we can't and should not have racist mascots, right? Because those all play into those dehumanizing tropes that people are presented of Native people. There's a really good film. It's called Real Injun, like REELINJUN. You should never refer to Native or Indigenous people as Injun. But that is what the film is called, and it's for a reason. You should just watch it. But that really was a big contribution to the discussion and framing around how Native people are presented in the media, so that we can bust it up a little bit. Americans look for, like, especially like in the environmental world, they want Native people to come in and save everyone instead of being in a relationship and building forward together, like on a continent that we all live on, which is like more inside indigenous like lifeways and understanding. So they prop up media darlings that fit within what they're trying to portray. So that's why you get people who like, are media darlings, but then they're not part of the communities that they're constantly speaking on, and it's not constructive. Like they're not grassroots, and it's very complicated. Another layer of invisibility comes from multiple jurisdictions of authorities have jurisdiction over Native people. But when something goes wrong, like somebody's mom or sister or daughter goes missing, they play hot potato with all these different jurisdictions with cases. And that actually leaves the family falling through the cracks and the missing person falling through the cracks. You can really see that with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirits movement. So that's that hashtag MMIWG2S. But a lot of this and what Witha is speaking to is all very like systemic and built into the system. People always say like the system's broken, it shouldn't be like that. No, this is how the system is supposed to work. It doesn't care.
Yep.
So this is the system working how it's designed.
So, Desiree, you brought up college mascots. I heard that and I just latched onto it. And a lot of organizations, colleges, teachers are putting out land acknowledgement statements right now. This seems to be a good step, but I worry that it is often done as window dressing instead of something more meaningful. How do you feel about it? Regardless, what are 2 or 3 other things that non-Native folks can do in the wake of this issue? And I'm going to ask you the same question after Desiree and Witha. So, how do you feel about those statements? And then, and we'll just forget about the non-Natives. Let's just focus on Native right now. I'm tired of talking about non-Natives. How do you feel about it?
Well, I feel 2 ways, like I'm of 2 minds, because one, when I hear a land acknowledgement coming from somebody non-Native in a space, it gives me an understanding of like where they're at in terms of like how they're trying to build together. But I also know that it can be like kind of a rubber stamp, like checkbox thing to be good to the Indians. You do the land acknowledgement and move on with your meeting. And that does happen.
A lot.
But like the very short version of the non-Natives question, like what can people do? We need land back. Land back. That's the answer. All roads lead back to land back for Indigenous, Black, and Asian, like colonized people have built this nation, and land is power, and we need land back.
Yes.
And white America does owe very specific things to Black and Indigenous communities that are very distinct. And I just believe that, settler race and class traders who care to be in good relationship with people around them, they do that due diligence work to understand what is distinct about what is owed, and then they do work to do that. But when you start looking at, like, Chinese folks built the railroads, Black labor has built everything. It's all on stolen land. So at a certain point, all of us together as people on this continent who are unwilling participants in colonialist capitalism, like, it goes back to land back. We just all need to, like, get our hands on land, everybody. But in a way that honors Indigenous, like, sovereignty of the tribes, and there is a way to do it. Then, there's groups that model that very well, but we just need land back.
Acknowledgement is not enough. We need reparations.
Right. Acknowledging that you've stolen something, that we've stolen something, and continuing to steal that thing is not an end of anything, right?
Get the F out of here.
Right.
Like, I'm tired. Yeah. So same question. I know, now I'm ready to yell. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm holding myself back. Desiree told us about this window dressing, possibly this 2 ways of understanding and checking the box. Do you have anything to add? Since you are literally working at a university at this moment. And so I'm just wondering if you might have anything that you want to add.
I guess I could speak to it a little bit. I definitely agree that, an acknowledgement is not only not enough, but it's also a part of a process that has to happen. So if you don't know that you're standing on Indigenous land, you can't really give it back.
Yeah.
And what I found working in higher education is that as quickly as you want to teach something, like, let me just give you this knowledge and tear down that ignorance. So it's really a slow slow process learning itself. So I think that there needs to be, because it's apparently when people engage in the land acknowledgement, it's not enough, right? So they're like, you acknowledge, but their actions afterwards do not work towards decolonizing or figuring out how to let go of that land. But you wonder why, right? So if I knew I was standing on someone's land, I would be like, hey, I need to, at least make something right here. But it just kind of goes to show the status of where we're at. Why is that not wrong enough?
Yeah.
We're not acting promptly. But I mean, I think it goes back to that same notion that it's so pervasive that my belief system, my opinion, the way I view the world is so right that I'm going to continue just to stand on this line. We've been here. I'm not going to. So those types of things. So really, I think the land acknowledgement is a pathway or even a doorway to that really extensive education that you need in order to, want to give that line back, I guess.
Yeah. So it seems to be like you're saying it's the pathway from just checking the box to understanding. But the thing that sucks in that, and I heard you bring it up, is that, Native folk have to be patient, right? We have to sit, it's like, maybe we're like patiently waiting for you to like check the box and then like, oh, acknowledge me. And then finally you're going to get to understanding. And it's sad. And think about, it's like the sad part about it is how many, we're not talking about decades, right? We're not talking about half a century. We're talking about the centuries that we've been patiently waiting patiently waiting. And then we want to talk about morality in relationship to this, especially on the backs of white folk, right? And you're gonna look at me, you're gonna look at my brown brothers and sisters and tell us that we're immoral, right? That we're asking for too much. It's like, who? Like, we've been patient. We've been waiting. Like, it's time for you to move from the box. It's time for you to move from acknowledgement and get to understanding. And understanding means giving that land back, right? And I'm not trying to. I'm actually taking what you said, and I'm like trying to tie it to Desiree, and be like, we've got to get to this movement of understanding, especially for these non-native folks, and especially I'm gonna just call it out for white folks.
For white folks,
right? Let's just really call it what it is. But I'm gonna sit here and I won't like shy away from this. You know, Black people are just as ignorant oftentimes in relationship to Native folks as white folk. You know, and I apologize for that. It's something that while we were setting up this episode, I told Matt about. I was like, you know, I am so naive, like, and I need to learn more. And I need to step up my knowledge to be in the understanding camp also. So it's not something that I'm like, would shy away from and say that Blacks have got, you know, because I think we're also there to be serious.
But so Oklahoma actually gave land back recently. So now there's a model out there.
Hey.
You can honor the treaties. So you know, so it is there. And I want to say there was like a toolkit on how to do a land acknowledgement. And I know some of the people who are working on that toolkit were central to Oklahoma. So that's where it starts, that education process, because we're so just mentally unaware of everybody that's not at the tip of our nose. And then to an actual process on like, here's actually how you're going to give our land back, is like, we actually have these treaties that you signed and created between within our communities. Now uphold those. So there's a model there now. I mean, I think that's pretty big. So I think we're going forward in a way, but we have to just continuously grease that wheel every day.
I agree.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you talk about models here for moving forward, because we've been talking a lot about problems facing indigenous communities on Turtle Island for centuries here. But you both have lots of experience resisting these problems and knowledge of resistance against them. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about any part of that resistance you might want to focus on, either from your own knowledge or your own experience, or Desiree, if you could tell us about some of your experiences at Standing Rock, that would be great, please.
Okay. So these are such broad questions. The only thing I can really say about Standing Rock is like, I go and people ask like all the time in a lot of different ways, like, what made you take action and go live at the Standing Rock camps for almost 8 months? And they're wanting to know, like, what is it that makes someone take that next step? And I think that it's important to understand that the front lines like that are for a specific set of people who have that mindset that they're ready to go out and weaponize their bodies and hold the space that they're in. But, you know, people have a lot of like this kind of, I don't know how else to say it, like guilt or shame if they didn't come out to Standing Rock and like didn't do that. But I have to really emphasize, so one of the things that kept everybody out there and kept everybody going was that we knew that the eyes of the world were upon us. We knew that the aunties were praying, the grandmas were sending up prayers, the uncles were thinking about everybody, Two-Spirit folks, like everybody We were enveloped in love from the entire world praying for us. And that is equally as important as standing on that front line. Like sending that sort of energy. And it sounds a little like, I don't want to sound like Marianne Williamson or anything, you know, but having that kind of energy and those eyes on you, like there's no shame or guilt in that not being the puzzle piece, that you're not that puzzle piece. There are so many opportunities that we have every single day to understand where and how we can for one another, right? And what we're doing in these moments is like what we're fighting for now is each other. We're not fighting for the planet right now. We're in a pandemic. We are fighting for each other's lives, literally. And so understanding what puzzle piece you are, whether you're working within the institutions to like know what baskets museums have and get those back to the community. Like, or maybe you're the puzzle piece that is like a language person. And so you're going to work on getting language back, getting resources back to communities that are losing language. If you're a teacher, making sure that you're teaching truth in history and not this weird colonizer narrative that is being spoon-fed to everybody. Like, it's not Black folks' fault that y'all don't understand Native communities. Not. You know, it's no one's fault. Like, we're all just monetized cogs in a wheel that get chewed up and spit out by capitalism. Nobody on this podcast is one of the 2,100 global billionaires. I'm sorry to tell you that. You know what I'm saying? So, like, the thing that makes people take action is when it's really, like, personal to what your lived experience is. But then I also think, like, you know, as a non-man, I know I have to advocate harder for myself for pay and things like that. And then that's a front line that, you know, so women and non-men are also conditioned to wait until you're asked to like run for office, or wait until someone comes up to you and is like, will you help me? And at a certain point, like, you just bust a spring loose and you're like, I can't wait for permission anymore. I'm not waiting for anybody to ask, because with the Dakota Access Pipeline, there's the water of 18 million people downstream is at risk. Right. Like, it's in these urgent moments. Like, I don't think people understand that Standing Rock was the last nail in the coffin. It was right here in this long line of a pipeline. There was years to try and stop it, and efforts to try and stop it. But that was like a crisis moment. And I think that that's what's happening right now also, is we have reached like our boiling point as the people, you know, and so we're starting to realize like what indigenous elders have been saying for a really long time, which is to teach us about the importance of interdependence with the planet, with each other. And every time we model that understanding of how important interdependence is, we break apart that American ego, you know, model that is about individual action and taking and never being within the natural order. Right? So don't wait for anybody to ask you. If you know that something is the right thing to do, you just freaking do it. You do it, and then if people want to come down on you for doing what you thought was right, like, that's their water to carry and not yours. So just freaking go for it. I'm kind of notorious for being one of the people that like gives away the keys. Like,
but no, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's systemic racism requires systemic resistance, right? And we're all going to have different pieces to play in that systemic resistance if we're going to undo 500 plus years of just awful expropriation. So I mean,
Right.
so this is interesting. This brings us to some other ways that we can resist in terms of making those connections between what's going on at Standing Rock, what's going on today, and what's been happening for these 500 plus years. So Wheata, what first brought you, Desiree, and I working together was this conference on the doctrine of discovery. That brings us back to the beginning of this process. And you organized this conference with the New York State Poor People's Campaign and indigenous activists from all over Turtle Island. So what can you tell us about that project and where it's headed from here? You're muted.
So I don't know where to start.
So what can you tell us about the doctrine of discovery?
Well, so Desiree is talking about if you feel that there's something that you need to do, just go and do it, right? All right, let me refer to my notes here because I took some notes. So part of my position at Potsdam within the job description is educating the campus community on indigenous issues, needs, and trends, right? And I sat there and took it very seriously because I understand how higher education actually can be really influential to people. And then when you're sending out those students into the workplace, back out into the world, that whole process there, it's really critical what we teach. So honestly, I didn't even know where to start because I looked at that job description as just like educate the campus community on indigenous issues, needs, and trends. I was like, what? Like, well, so where do I begin?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I went down to the micro level of what the students were experiencing, and there was already a past of experiences that people were openly speaking about with their experiences, and then I looked at there's a little thing here. I looked at the current status of students currently still going there, and just looking at those things that their experiences, I started to really started to understand the words that you speak, Matt, the white supremacist projects, these ultimate projects. And I know you spoke it before when you're talking, when you use the word project, I was like, you're absolutely right. This is a project. It's formulaic. It's built. So I'm like, how do we educate about these systems that indigenous students are going into? All right, so actually there was a First and Presbyterian church that is a couple blocks, I believe, away from Potsdam, and one of my grandpa's here's wife reached out to me, came to the Office of Native American Affairs and said, hey, I'm down here at this church, come eat lunch with me. I want to meet you. You're one of Harry's granddaughters, right? So I was like, okay. So I went to the church, and then I sat down with Holly. So Holly, we all working the group, and we were just talking, and then I think I attended the Racial Equity Institute training, and the facilitator there mentioned something about a papa bowl, and then she started mentioning the laws, and then I was just like, oh my goodness. And I walked away from that training driving throughout Potsdam, and what the facilitator had explained was the housing housing program that happens within the United States. How did white families come upon housing, and how other communities, Black, indigenous, sorry, I'm screwing that all up right now, but communities fall into these poor communities, right? And I was driving, I realized how old those houses were, and I was just like, this time is when this housing program was created, it's still existing today. So I want to share that with Holly, and then she started talking about this word called contemporaneousness. She's where she explained it a lot better, and then she brought up, she's like, well, there's a lot of people who are doing work on the doctrine of discovery, and I was just like, oh, okay. And then, I kind of didn't really even know what that was at the moment. And then she got me connected to Suzanne, who we now work with now. And the first couple of emails, I was ignoring them, honestly, because I was like, I don't know what this is. And then I started really critically just started reading, and then it was also connected to the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous People. And then I was just like, okay. And I was like, this is something that we need to educate on, because the more I start learning about the doctrine of discovery, you find out it's the foundation. And as what we're learning from Agnes Williams with the Indigenous Women's Initiative out of Buffalo, New York, is actually U.S. law. So I'm like, whoa, okay. So if you want to know about Indigenous needs, trends, and issues, because sorry, I'm kind of going off there, but you look at it, and I find that higher education would simply just perpetuate these problems if you're not looking at the root problems. Where this started. And so Matt and I, we've been at least working on this over a year now, but the education about the doctrine of discovery has been so supplemental to literally everything, because you can relate it to everything. It's foundational in law, but it's also perpetuated throughout all institutions. So I'm gonna read the Mark Charles definition, so that watchers understand, like, okay, so what is the doctrine of discovery? Okay. Also, everybody needs to get this book and read it. It's absolutely incredible. So anyway, so the doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly regarding administration of indigenous land. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls Native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th century. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in the dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. So this genius, Mark Charles, just lays it all out for us and says, hey, here's where your racial biases are coming from, and here's how they're being perpetuated in these institutions. And so really, it was kind of just like a roadmap there. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I'm kind of losing it here.
No,
but I mean, I think that's perfect. I mean, so this is sort of, I mean, this explains how I felt since we've been working on this too, is like, if we want to understand systemic white supremacy in the Americas, we need to go back to the beginning, and the beginning of the process of stealing land and bodies in the Americas was this doctrine of discovery. And so thank you for turning me on to that, but also in particular for showing me not only this Mark Charles book, Unsettling Truths, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery, but also this documentary here, The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code, directed by Sheldon Wolfchild and produced by Stephen Newcomb. This is another thing folks who are interested in the doctrine of learning more about the doctrine of discovery should take a look at. So Desiree had to leave at the top of the hour. So we just had one more question that we wanted to get your take on here, because we're trying to make things really real for people here. And one of the things that I think is really real for you and for Desiree is that both of you are fighters. You deal with a lot. You continually resist a lot. So what keeps you going? What keeps you fighting day after day?
I know. I saw that question. I was like, I think there's like 100 answers to that. But I mean, it would come down to my son needs to live in a fair world, and it shouldn't just be at the boundaries of a reservation or a native community. It should be the entire Turtle Island. And that's what it that's kind of just what it comes down to, I suppose.
No, that's fantastic.
No, I feel that. I think, you know, it's like, I'm not gonna lie, I almost started tearing, almost started tearing up a little bit there, because I feel that also I know my mom feels it every day for me and my brother. I know that if I ever have the children, I will feel the same way. And it breaks, like, that's the thing that really breaks my heart, is that we've been existing in this space for so long, and not being safe, right? Not being secure, and really at the whim of America and white folks. And it's sad. And to know that you have to bring, you know, children into a world that you already know that they're going to be disenfranchised, is just like disheartening. Like, and so I get that fight. For sure. Yeah. I really do. I'm like, yeah, my heart's hurting now. My heart's hurting now for sure. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I really do.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you bringing community together as you have, right? So this is one of the things I think Desiree was spot on about here is, right, we need this systematic resistance, and we need to see how groups that have been pitted against each other historically by powers that be have so much to bring to each other, and the work you've done on that front is so important. So thank you very much, Wheeta. And thank you for taking the time to spend some time with us today on the show.
We really appreciated it. We really did.
Absolutely. Thank you.